of as points or perhaps positions within a multiverse landscape, and in this way of visualizing the dimensions we get to that landscape by the time we're in the seventh dimension, then why do we need to think about any more dimensions beyond that? To my way of thinking, you can express the same concern about every definition of every single dimension, and the arguments have to keep coming back to, what are we missing within this current dimension? For instance, people say that the third spatial dimension is really all you need because no matter what other universe you imagine, it should have a third dimensional expression. Or there are people who say all we need is space-time, because by the time you have the third dimension plus time, which gives the third dimension a way to change from state to state, then you can imagine every single possible universe strung end to end within infinite space-time. And because that string of all possible states is infinite, you will eventually get to every possible universe. Or you can have people who say space-time plus its probabilistic outcomes, whichever its many worlds interpretation says are orthogonal or at right angles to space-time, leading to my conclusion that these branches are in the fifth dimension, gives you everything you need to imagine every possible universe. From there, I've proposed that the branches for our universe, which no amount of chance or choice will allow us to select, like the branches where dinosaurs never became extinct, or the ones where I died in a car accident last year, are in the sixth dimension. And this uses the same logical reasoning that defines any spatial dimension. There always needs to be a new degree of freedom added for us to be able to call what we're talking about a new dimension. And the new dimension allows us to get to something that was unavailable from the previous dimensions. Likewise, I propose that those other universes with different basic physical laws are located in other positions within the seventh dimension and above, and this is why our universe, constrained at its position within the multiverse landscape, never wanders off into one of those other universes. So this is the question: why isn't the seventh dimension as far as we need to go? We have to continue with the logic we've used from the outset. Imagine a point of infinite size in the sixth dimension, and it's much the same as imagining the indeterminate point we started from with our thought experiment. The point encompasses the whole dimension. If we can think of a different point that is not subsumed by that first point, then the point-line-plane postulate tells us we found a way to get to the next dimension up. Those 2 points define a line in the seventh dimension. What if the second point we just imagined represents a universe where the strength of gravity is different from ours? Then the line that passes through those 2 points is like a one-dimensional line, and that line extends through all possible values for gravity. Different positions on that line would include impossible universes, which could not have come into existence because the strength of gravity was above or below a certain threshold needed to allow a physical universe to express itself. And such imaginary universes might be at many places along the line, interspersed with universes that were able to cohere into more organized states. What about a universe with a different value for the speed of light, or whatever physical constant you care to imagine? That's not on the line we just drew. We could erase the other point we drew, then place a new point for a universe with a different speed of light, and the new line that passes through those 2 points would be all possible realities resulting from different values for the speed of light. But what if I want to consider both lines simultaneously? It can't be done without entering the next dimension up, the eighth dimension. So with the logic of the point-line-plane postulate, we have a way of thinking of the eighth dimension as being like a plane, and our universe can be viewed as a point in the eighth dimension with those 2 lines or any other lines representing the other different initial conditions universes passing through our point within that plane. Remember this, with the point-line-plane postulate, the point you start from is in dimension x, the line to a different point is in dimension x plus 1, and the plane defined by a third point not on that line is in dimension x plus 2. Having worked through those 3 dimensions, nothing moves or changes about the first point. We're just adding dimensions that allow us to view that starting point from different perspectives. Thinking of our universe as a largest possible point encompassing the phase space of the 6th dimension then, doesn't mean that we can't view the unchanging point from the widening perspective of the 7th or 8th dimension. Quite the contrary, this logic is the accepted approach to visualizing spatial dimensions. Likewise, the idealized shapes we've started each of these entries with, like the octaract at the start of this entry, have an underlying symmetry, where each of the points are equidistant to their adjacent ones in the same way that the adjacent points of a 3D cube are equidistant when viewed within the third dimension. This means that the 8D octaract, like any of the other hypercube shapes, can be placed within a hypersphere with the same number of dimensions, and the other points of the hypercube are pushed apart from the center of the hypersphere symmetrically. The point of indeterminate size can become a sphere occupying as little or as much of the dimension it's placed within. At its largest possible expression, this point becomes a finite but unbounded hypersphere, occupying the entire phase space of the dimension it's within. The rotating shapes we're looking at now are known as the Platonic solids. Pictured here are the tetrahedron, the cube or hexahedron, the octahedron, the dodecahedron, and the icosahedron. Do you see how we can apply this same idea of symmetric points pushed out from a central position? This even includes shapes like the nested tetrahedra we see here on the left, which can be used to create the dodecahedron on the right. Speaking of phase space, here's a link now to a recent New Scientist article about a new paper published by physicist Lee Smolin and others at archive.org, proposing that all possible universes could be contained within an 8-dimensional phase space. To follow the logic we've been pursuing here, the 6-dimensional phase space for our own universe, or any specific universe with locked-in physical laws, would be a subset of an 8-dimensional phase space that encompasses all possible universes. Likewise, it's worth noting that Everett didn't limit his theory of the universal wave function to just our unique universe. So while the phase space of a unique, different initial conditions universe such as ours could be encompassed within the 6th dimension, the logic we followed here shows us that Everett's theory ultimately should be considered from the phase space of the 8th dimension to include the wave function of all those other possible universes. So what's beyond the 8th dimension? The simplest way to take our thought experiment to the next dimension up now is to ask this: how would you jump from the universe with a different value for gravity to the universe with the different speed of light without passing through the intermediate possibility? To get to that additional degree of freedom, you need the next dimension up. For our 2D Flaplander ant, that was the 3rd dimension. For our fly in the 5th dimensional garden hose analogy, that freedom to flit from location to location was in the 6th dimension. And for all those different universes considered from the 8th dimension, where do you think we'd achieve this additional degree of freedom? We'll talk about that next time with Imagining the 9th Dimension.